actually rolling.
All right. So today we are interviewing Kai Luna, and it is March 10th, 2013. We are at the Military Museums. We are on the Navy side. We are in the Archives Research Room, and Ian Watson is on camera. I am James Baldwin, interviewer, and of course Kai is our honored guest here. So Kai, could you provide us first with your full name?
My full name is Kai Luna. It's Kai, of course, is a typical Danish name. I don't have a middle name, so it's just Kai Luna.
And what were you in the service? Like, what was your rank, and what section were you belonging to?
I belong to the communication branch. My rank when I was in Korea was a leading telegrapher.
And that would be with the Royal Canadian Navy, then,
right.
At the time. And what was your length of service?
I joined the Navy in Tecumseh in August of 1946, and my time was up when we were in Korea in 1951. When we got back to Esquimalt, I went on discharge, and I got out in 1951.
And what ships would you have served on in your career?
I started off with the HMCS Crescent. I was on the Uganda. I was on the Ontario. I was on the ML-124, which is a small motor torpedo boat. And then I got on the Cayuga, the Athabascan, and when I was taking my discharge, I was on the HMCS Sault Ste. Marie.
So could you tell us where you were born and maybe a little bit about your background?
I was born in Denmark. I was born in a place called Tømrup, and which is now the runway for the Danish. What is there? You know where the airport is, where Tømrup is, and
Would that be outside Copenhagen?
it is now part of it. It was part of Copenhagen at that time too.
And then where would you, how did you get to Canada?
It was decided that my father was going to come to Canada and become a Danish book salesman. He had a university education in accounting, and when we got to Canada, of course, that bookkeeping job did not pan out, and he ended up becoming an accountant for the Dominion Glass in Redcliff, Alberta.
So where did you go to school then, in Redcliff?
Yes, I went to school in Redcliff from grade 1 to grade 11, and in 1945 I ended up coming to Calgary and went to school in Mount Royal College, and took my high school in Mount Royal College.
So when did you join the Navy, and why did you join the Navy?
The first, I decided that I had friends that were in the Navy in 1945 and things like this, and I thought that I should join them, even though it was the end of the war. When I was 17 and a half, I went up to Tecumseh to join the Navy, and I was told if I didn't have my parents' permission, I could not. They would not take me into the Navy. I finished my grade 12 in Mount Royal in 1946, and in that summer I decided that I still wanted to go into the Navy, even though I didn't have my parents' permission. But they accepted me even without my parents' permission.
So what were you trained as in the Navy?
I had quite a few communication knowledge when I was in the Army Cadets, when we were in Redcliff, going to school. And when they found that out in the Navy, then I was accepted as communications, to go into communications.
And at the time, that had a bit of a different name, did it? Like it wasn't like a radio operator, it was, what did they call it at the time?
Telegrapher.
A telegrapher,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
So-
Well, it was wireless telegrapher, what it was called. And I spent some time in Aden doing my basic training. When I was finished my basic training, I was sent to Halifax, and we started our course in communications in Halifax.
So I understand you were really proud to be a sailor. Do you have a story about your being proud to be a sailor?
I had a cousin in Denmark that was a sailor, and as I say, when we came to Canada in 1929, we were on board a ship called the Hellig Olaf, SS Hellig Olaf, and the story was that I learned to walk on that ship. And that was why I felt that I had some sort of Navy communications or whatever, and I guess that's why I ended up in the Navy, or that's a story that I heard from my family, that's probably how come I ended up in the Navy.
So could you explain what they issued what you call the square rig in Halifax?
No, the square rig, when I first joined the Navy and things like this, there was not any, they were not looking for any radio operators or wireless telegraphers, and they said that I should become a writer. That was one of the, and so I became a probationary writer, which I was not very happy about. Again, we wore a square rig, which is not the typical sailor suit. And so for 3 months, I wore this probationary writer's uniform. When I went ashore, I still had my civilian clothes. I had a leather jacket and everything else, and I sort of felt, well, if they're not going to give me a sailor suit, then I'm going to keep wearing my leather jacket until they finally transfer me to a wireless telegrapher. I even went ashore and bought myself a sailor suit and wore that, which if I'd ever been caught, I probably would have been put in a brig or whatever happens. But anyway, I bought my sailor suit and I started wearing that, and I did not get caught wearing it, so.
Did that attract more females?
Of course. I don't know whether, sailor suits were pretty flashy things for young guys to go ashore with, and the girls liked them, there's no doubt about it.
So do you remember hearing about Korea, or how you end up getting assigned to Korea? Can you explain some of that?
Well, of course, in 1946, there wasn't any problems at that particular time with Korea, but in 1950, as a matter of fact, in 1950, the Royal Canadian Navy was going to do a world tour with the Cayuga, the Athabascan, and the Sioux, and I believe it was the cruiser Uganda was also going to go with us. and that was in June of 1950. And of course, that was the time when the Korean conflict started. And I had made arrangements to meet all my relatives in Copenhagen. Copenhagen was one of the ports that the world tour was going to include. And of course, all my relatives were excited that they were going to have me come there and visit with them. And then I believe it was in June of 1950, the Korean war or aggression started. And it was decided that rather than we go on a world tour, that we were assigned to go to Korea, and that's how we ended up in Korea. And of course, I had volunteered to go on to the Cayuga because I thought we were going around the world. And that was, of course, the typical time when the word was, don't ever volunteer for anything because you never know where you're going to go. And we ended up in Korea we arrived in Korea in July of 1950, and started our patrols and what we were supposed to do from then on. And in 1951, Cayuga in March or April, we were relieved by an East Coast destroyer, and that was a Nootka, and we came back to Canada.
Can you describe some of your duties on Cayuga? Like, what would be a typical day that you would do?
Well, there were a number of jobs that you did when you were a wireless operator. Of course, you worked in the radio room and copied all kinds of Morse code and things like this. But there was another job, because it was considered wartime, was that everything had to be coded and decoded. And one of the interesting things was that I was on duty decoding messages when MacArthur was relieved by President Truman, because that was a time when they were expecting the Chinese were going to come and support the North Koreans and things like this. And General MacArthur wanted to drop the atomic bomb on before the Chinese came in to help Korea. And this was a sort of an exciting message that I decoded, that MacArthur had been fired by President Truman.
So where would you be located in the ship? Just a brief explanation of, like, where is the wireless room located on the?
We have two radio rooms on a destroyer, Radio 1 and Radio 2. Radio 1 is really on the main deck. We're probably about 3 decks down from the bridge. We're midship, located midship for the Radio 1. Radio 2 is in the stern of the destroyer and below the water line, so that when you go to Radio 2, and that was my action station was Radio 2, and you go back there, and that's where you stay, and you're dogged down. In other words, it's a watertight situation where when you go down there, you're clamped in, and you don't get out of there. And an exciting thing that happened when we were going through a minefield at one point in time, and rather a scary situation that we knew that we were very close to a minefield, and when you're sitting in Radio 2 wondering whether if you're going to hit one of these things, are you going to get out of there? So that was an interesting location.
Do you recall any events on the voyage over, like you went to kind of through Hawaii and then you would have gone to, I believe, is it Sasebo in Japan?
Well, that's where we were going to, was Sasebo in Japan, was our where the ships were going from when they went to Korea. But going over to from Esquimalt over to Japan, Sasebo, we stopped in Hawaii, Kwajalein, Guam. You know, we don't travel very fast on a ship and things like this. I think it was a 7-day trip over to Sasebo.
And your captain is a well-known naval figure called Captain J.V. Block. Do you have any overall impressions of him, or in the voyage over, you were getting used to him as captain? Anything that happened there that was maybe interesting, or any perspectives you have?
Jeffrey Brock was quite a flamboyant captain. Pretty strict captain, and but he was a fantastic seaman, and certainly he was a good captain. Other than that,
So do you remember your first impressions on seeing Korea when from Japan you go to Korea? What your first impressions were?
Yeah, our first action activities after we got to Sasebo in July, end of July. We were assigned to be escort for troop ships going from Sasebo over to Busan, which is a base in the southern part of South Korea. We did a lot of escort duties and with troop ships and supply ships. We were escorting them all the time back and forth. So that was our first jobs that the ships had when we arrived in Korea.
You were in a rather famous operation in December where you're evacuating troops out, Marines out. Could you tell us a little bit about that shenanigan?
Yeah, what happened when the Chinese came into the war? They of course, there was almost no resistance to them. They were, I don't know how many million Chinese came across the Yellow River and of course started marching down all through Korea, from North Korea to South Korea. And one of the important activities that happened was that there was a place called Shinampo, which is 21 miles up a river called the Shinampo River, and Captain Brock was asked if he could take his ships up this river, up to Shinampo, and help to destroy all the supplies that they had in there, because they knew the Chinese were coming over, and there was a bunch of Marines that were really trapped in Shinampo, and we were asked to go up there to bring them out. This was a very narrow river. It happened in almost the middle of the night in a snowstorm. But anyway, we got up that river. protected the Marines and got them on board other ships so that they could get out of there. And then after that, when they were all relieved, the Athabascan and the Cayuga and I believe it was a Forest Royal, yes, because the river was very narrow and not very navigable. The Warramunga, this was an Australian destroyer, went aground. The Canadian ship, the Sioux, which was another ship, went aground. But after we got up there finally in 4.5 hours, we made it into the port of Chenampo, and we completely destroyed the port facilities. The Chinese, of course, were getting very close to Chenampo by this time, and there was a fear that the 4 ships may again run into grounding problems when we left. And however, we did manage to get out. The Chinese, we knew the Chinese were on the north side of the river that we were traveling through. And it was a sort of a scary time at that particular time because we weren't sure whether the Chinese were going to be able to stop us from getting out of there again. So that was quite a thing that we pulled off there in Korea. And it was Canadian ships that were the main people that were there.
So Kai, during the operation like that, are you mainly in that radio room and
Yes.
You're not able to go up and see what's really happening around you, or can you go up and look on deck, or how does that work?
We did, although when you're in an activity like that, you're at action stations, and when you're at action stations, you've got to stay at that. Wherever your action station is allotted, you have to stay there. But you can go and, in short periods, you could go where we were located. We could go onto the midships there and see what was going on, all the firing that was going on and things like this. And Cayuga and Athabascan were very good at firing. There was one situation there where there was a large chimney in the port area and things like this, that whether it was something that we wanted to do was knock that huge chimney down, things like this. We finally were able to do it, and there was a great activity on board ship there that we finally knocked this chimney down. It wasn't such an important part, but it was a challenge to knock this thing over.
And this is all at night. Most of this is at night.
Day and yeah, yes, it was day and night, and we sat up there for 2 days, I guess it was, that we were up there, and we finally had to get out of there because we knew the Chinese were coming down, and of course, if we'd have been caught up there, as I say, 21 miles up a river, which is not very wide and not very deep, it's pretty scary. And then finding out that we had 2 of our ships running aground in the sandbars. We had a navigator on board there by the name of Lieutenant Collier. I don't know how many soundings he did going up to get up to Chenampo, but it was just fantastic what he had accomplished. And we were the lead ship going up, and of course we had our small lights on the stern of each ship, But even then, it was very difficult to follow Cayuga going up there, and the Athabascan following and going astern.
So was there any other major in operations that you were involved in, say like were Incheon or any of those? Were you guys involved in those?
Yes, we were involved in the Incheon invasion, and where Incheon was almost completely destroyed by bombardments. This is, I guess, MacArthur was still involved in that. There was I think there was some difficulty with different commanders wanting to go to different places to create. But Incheon was a perfect place to catch the Chinese, to stop them from coming back up from Busan and things like this. So it was decided that Incheon was the place that there was going to be the invasion, and it was a success. So.
And what were your duties there at Incheon? What was the ship doing there? Do you remember the role the ship was?
The role, we were not, the Cayuga was not directly involved in the bombardment of Incheon. I can't remember exactly how many ships there were there, but there was a tremendous amount of ships involved in that invasion. American, Australian, us, and of course the Americans were the one with the most of ships that were there. So.
Did you ever get into Incheon itself and see what it was like there?
Yes, after that invasion, we were allowed to go ashore and see what was happening there, and I know that I took two of my telegraphers along with us when we went ashore, and we ended up loading up with chocolate bars and everything else like this, because there was little Korean kids running around there. I don't know how many people, civilians that were killed in that invasion and things like that, including children. But I know that the three of us that went ashore that particular day took a whole bunch of chocolate bars and candies and things like this, and when we got to meet them ashore and things like this, of course, I've got pictures of the two little Korean kids that were sitting with us, and we made sure that they got chocolate bars and everything else. That it was just an amazing bombardment that took place there too.
Was that organized in the sense that you went to a building and the children were already there, or would the children just come up to you?
They were just wondering, us. Not that we could speak to them or anything else like this, but it was obvious that they had become orphans, and they really had no, just wandering around. And of course, when one of the things that we wanted to do was to say that we were still interested in their welfare and things like this, that we should try to make sure that they got some food or candies or whatever. But,
do you recall anything related to Seoul itself? Did you ever go into Seoul or
no,
do operations off Seoul?
Never got into Seoul. Incheon was really the port that, and Seoul, of course, is the capital of South Korea now.
So you had you mentioned in one of your photographs a memorable Christmas. So that would be is that the 1950?
1950.
Can you tell us a little bit about what you did, and you have a wife at that time? Do you have a wife at that time?
Yes, and of course we had a tremendous amount of publicity going back to Canada on the things that we were doing, and this particular, when we had Christmas in 1950, which I have a menu of what we had, and it was, I can just mention this, that we had roast turkey with gravy and dressing, cranberry sauce, Brussels sprouts, creamed potatoes. It was amazing that we had that because we had been at sea for quite some time. As a matter of fact, the Cayuga, I think even now, we have the record of being at sea for the longest time, and I believe it was 52 days that we were at sea that we didn't touch shore. And of course, we had the Christmas dinner, which was very good, and we had messages from back being sent from Canada, from the Prime Minister and the Naval Association and the flag officer from the Pacific Coast, sending us message of their well-being. And we, at that particular time, we were in the Yellow Sea, December the 25th, 1950. But that was Christmas at sea, and as I say, that was a long stretch to be at sea, 52 days.
And I believe you have a Christmas, like a telegraph description that you're communicating with your wife on that, and can you talk about maybe was it lonely, or how was that for you to be away from your wife?
Well, we had just been married before this happened. We were married in 1949, and of course it was a tough time for many of us that had wives that were still back in Esquimalt or in Victoria. One of the problem areas that we had at that particular time was that the Americans were looking after our mail delivery and things like this, and we would end up with no mail for weeks upon weeks, and then all of a sudden we would get the mail delivered to the ships and things like this, and we would end up with maybe 30 or 40 letters. That were wonderful to get, but again, the mail delivery was so bad that it almost caused a very serious problem on board ship, that we weren't getting mail delivery. Finally, I believe it was the Royal Canadian Air Force that started bringing the mail over into Sasebo, and we were getting a little better delivery of mail. But that was a terrible thing, that we just were not getting good mail delivery, and which causes a morale problem, and things, there were things that were happening that shouldn't have been happening, just by the fact that we weren't getting good mail delivery.
Just to switch a little bit, do you remember anything about blockade patrols, like where you're doing, you're checking out junks or
Yes.
anything like that? Could you describe some of that?
Yes, and of course the Rock Navy, we were working with them, and if we wanted them to be involved in, there was an awful lot of islands around North and South Korea, and of course there were suspicions that that there was Koreans that were not really being very loyal to the Rock Navy, and there were times when we had situations that these small ships during the day were very, there was no problems with them, but in the evening or during nightfall and after nightfall and things like this, that these little ships were carrying mines, and were dropping off mines in certain locations around these islands. And we actually had one U.S. destroyer that hit one of the mines, I don't know, I can't remember. I do have a picture of that destroyer. The forecastle was blown off, and they managed to bring her into port. But there was a lot of U.S. Navy types that died as a result of running into a mine. So there was suspicions that the Rock Navy may not have been as reliable as they should have been. Although there were times when we had Rock people working with the Cayuga, and we had some of them on board our ship, and were doing very well. But there were situations there where there were mines being dropped off over the side of these small ships and causing problems for us.
There is a campaign called the Island Campaign, where there's guerrillas and some fighting going on. Was Cayuga ever connected with supporting any of those operations?
Yes, we actually had. I was not involved with any of these. It was special duties where some sailors were assigned to go ashore and find out what some of the Koreans were doing. And there was some things going on board. Although they were supposed to be working with us, there was some situations where they were communists and were helping the North Koreans dropping mines. And we had mines all over the place on both east and west of North and South Korea. Scary.
Yeah, so can I clarify? You're saying sometimes you're not sure which side you're helping with these guys?
Exactly.
Oh.
You weren't sure whether they were with us or against us.
Could you describe, sometimes they talk about like a carrier support or carrier operations or where you're escorting?
Yeah, we were these are called, you could be called a picket ship, and the Philippine Sea was an aircraft carrier that operated in Korea, and we were picket ship, what was called the picket ship for the Philippine Sea, and we would be following what they were doing and things like this, and if one of their aircraft went over the side, our duty would be to go and pick them up. And the Philippine Sea, and we were also picket ship for the Missouri. The Missouri, of course, is quite a famous ship and has 16-inch guns. A and B and C guns are they have 16-inch guns on there, and the Missouri was used to do some bombarding, and with 16-inch guns the Missouri could fire 20 to 21 miles into Korea or over Korea and things like this, and they would have aircraft up in the air doing spotting for them and things like this, and they, as I say, they could actually fire, and the Cayuga was a picket ship with the Missouri when she was doing some of those firings, and amazing what it could do with 16-inch guns.
Do you ever recall whether the Cayuga was hit by any enemy fire or while you were aboard?
There was a situation at the beginning of the war there that although we, the U.S. Air Force and things like this really did have control of the air, but there was a time there when they had some, North Korea had some MiGs that were flying at that particular time, and we had a situation where a MiG, whether there was 2 or 3 MiGs, did some firing and things like this, and we actually had them try to attack our Canadian ships, and the Cayuga was one of the ones where there was some aircraft trying to do some damage to the Cayuga, and we actually had some shots fired at us.
Do you, any other operations that stand out in your mind, like bombardments or any other types of operations? You described the mine lane
Yes.
scare the one time?
Yes.
Mine sweeping square?
And we were also, the Cayuga, when we had knowledge that the Chinese were coming into the war, the Yellow River was the line between China and North Korea. We actually went up the Yellow River when the Chinese were thinking of coming across. We sat in the Yellow River to see what was going on there and things like this, and they finally did come across, and we did get out of the Yellow River, and Brock, of course, our captain, wanted to do this sort of thing, and he made an issue out of this sort of thing, that we should go and sit in the Yellow River and wait for the Chinese to see what they were doing, whether they were going to come across. And of course they did come across by the, I don't know whether it was by the millions, but it was a tremendous situation when the Chinese came into the war, and of course created a situation where they actually helping the North Koreans out, and they actually came across the river, pushed everything back, almost down to the bottom of South Korea in their first advance into the war, and of course the Canadian Army was very involved, and different divisions were very involved with this sort of thing, that when they were coming across. And we could do bombardments, and we were doing some bombardments on the trains that were, North Korean trains that were coming down, trying to stop them from going. And there were so many tunnels involved in the situation where the North Koreans were using trains to bring their troops down and things like this, and we were in a situation where we had some of our Canadian destroyers who were very active in knocking these, as the trains were trying to get through from one tunnel to another, going down and things like this. We were trying to knock these things over because they were supplying both troops and ammunition and all of these sort of things to their troops. And
do you recall going for refits, like where you're going to have to be resupplied and you're going to have the ship fixed? Is there a major one to Hong Kong at some point?
yes, we did. This was a situation where we were going down to Hong Kong for some R&R, rest and recreation. And at that particular time, we ran into a typhoon called Typhoon Clara, a tremendous storm, and that we ran into, both the Athabascan and the Cayuga. We ended up with a lot of damage. We had ammunition lockers that, because of the storm, were knocked right off that were welded to the ship and things like this, but it was so bad that the storm knocked ammunition lockers off of our ship. We lost a couple of, what do we call them?
Like launches or boats?
Boats, our rescue boats and things like this. That Davis that held these boats on were just twisted and things like this on the ship, and the boats were knocked right off the ship. We ended up going into Hong Kong for refit and although we were only supposed to be there for a couple of days, we ended up for over a week because of all the damage that was done to the Cayuga and the Athabascan as a result of that typhoon. One of the worst storms I had ever been in.
Was anybody injured or lost at that stage or during the storm?
We actually lost a guy overboard during the storm, and the Cayuga, he was off of the Athabascan. He went overboard off the Athabascan, and it was a situation there where the two ships actually. I know I got out of the radio room and I was looking to see what was happening, and you could see this guy bobbing up and down in the ocean. And I said to my buddy, I said, there's no way we're going to pick this guy up. This guy, he's a goner. But anyway, the two ships were able to get him in between the ships. And as a result of these two ships getting him in between us, that the ocean was not quite as difficult. And unbelievably, we got him in between the ships, and one of the guys was able to grab him when we went by and pull him on board ship. He was a non-swimmer, and he ended up getting his certificate that he could now swim and things like this. But that was one of the bad things during that storm that happened, that he went overboard, and to think that we were able to get him between the ships and reach out and grab him and pull him on board. Unbelievable.
I have to ask, did he have a life jacket on?
He probably did. We all wore life jackets that were hung around our waist.
Oh, okay.
And you could open this up, and I can't remember whether he indeed came back on board with a life jacket on, but somebody grabbed him. As a matter of fact, I think it was the padre that we had aboard ship grabbed him.
You've mentioned the Japanese port a number of times that you went back to for refitting and things. Do you remember any particular memories about that or recall anything? Sasebo?
No, the only port that we went in and got repairs was at Hong Kong, and it was quite a job for them to put the ammunition locker, weld them back on board.
So Sasebo was only at the start when you were coming over from Canada that you went there?
No.
No?
Sasebo was the main port that we used. All of the United Nations ships that were involved in things like this, when they were not involved in activities around Korea, they came back into Sasebo. And Sasebo could do some minor repairs and things like this. But you know, we probably at times had over 100 ships sit, you know, they didn't have port facilities that, where you could go alongside. So therefore, almost all of the ships anchored in the harbor of Sato. And when there were pictures of, you know, that you could see 100 ships, warships, you know, and just, that's where they went when they weren't on active duty in Korea. And of course, there were funny things that happened when you went ashore and things like this, that, you know, we would have guys going ashore, and you would end up, because there were so many different nationalities at that time that were there, where there were Americans, Dutch, Canadian, New Zealand, Australian. I don't know whether any more ships there, but you can imagine when all of these people, you know, we would have minor wars when people were going ashore in Sasebo and trying to get back on board ship and things like this, where you would have fights going on all the time and people being thrown off the jetties and all of these sort of things that were happening. So it finally ended up that they had to get certain nationalities that got along together. Canadians and Americans used, we had duty boats that took us back to the ship because we were anchored in the harbor and things like this. But at midnight, when people were supposed to be going back ashore and things, it was a situation where, as I say, there were minor wars going on the jetties. So it ended up that New Zealanders and Dutch maybe were using one jetty, and Canadians and Americans, because they got along pretty well, worked together on other, so that they separated these things to try to cut down on the activities that were happening at midnight when people were going back to their ships.